The wedding dress was the last thing she ever made with hope. It hung on a simple cedar peg inside the cabin, each stitch a tiny prayer for a life she thought was just around the corner. A life with Charles. He'd promised her a homestead, a quiet little piece of the world beyond the Mississippi, where the trees met the sky and the only sounds were birds and their children's laughter. Peace. He'd promised her peace. But Lydia was about to learn a hard lesson. A lesson written in dust and blood. A lesson that teaches you promises are just words, and words weigh nothing when greed comes knocking. They came at dusk. You could barely see them against the setting sun. Just 5 silhouettes on horseback, their faces wrapped in dirty cloth, their mounts covered in the red dirt of the plains. They looked like ghosts riding out of a bad dream. Lydia was out back, feeding the chickens, humming a tune she'd planned to dance to at her wedding. She never heard them coming. The first hand tangled in her hair, yanking her back so hard her neck snapped. A scream ripped from her throat, raw and terrified, echoing across the quiet clearing. She waited for Charles to come running. She waited for the man who promised her forever to save her. She was wrong. He came out of the cabin, but he wasn't running. He was walking. Slow, deliberate. His head was bowed, and in his palm, something jingled. Silver. He wouldn't even look at her. He just stared at the leader of the bandits, his voice low and shaky. "You said you wouldn't be rough with her," Charles muttered, the words slithering out of his mouth like snakes. "I just want her breathing. Enough to keep the law off my back if they come sniffing around." And just like that, the world shattered. This wasn't a robbery. This was a business deal. She wasn't being stolen from him. She was being sold by him. The man she loved, the man she was going to marry, was trading her life for a handful of coins. Her mind fractured. One half screamed in pure animal terror. The other half drowned in a betrayal so deep it felt like her soul was splitting apart. She fought. Oh, she fought. She kicked and clawed and screamed his name, but it was useless. They were too strong. They tied her hands with rough rope that bit into her skin and threw her over a saddle like a sack of grain. The last thing she saw of her old life, of the life she'd prayed for, was Charles. He simply turned his back on her, pushed open the cabin door, and walked inside, closing it behind him, as if she had never existed at all. The ride was a blur of pain and misery. The world was a smear of dark trees and endless sky, seen upside down from the back of a horse. The bandits laughed and argued, their voices a cruel soundtrack to her nightmare. They were already debating who would get her first, who would get to break her. She closed her eyes and prayed for it to end. She prayed for a stray bullet, for the horse to stumble, for a quick, merciful death. But death didn't come. Something else did. They finally stopped to make camp by a stream, the water chuckling in the darkness, mocking her. They untied her from the horse and tossed her by the fire they'd built, her body aching, her spirit broken. She just lay there in the dirt, empty. That's when she heard it. It wasn't a sound from the bandits. It was something else. A whisper in the trees. A low, swift rustle of leaves that didn't belong to the wind. A shadow moved, then another. Before anyone could react, an arrow flew out of the darkness, silent as a moth, and buried itself in a bandit's throat. He gurgled once and fell face first into the fire. Another arrow flew, and another. 2 more men dropped before they could even draw their guns. A fourth, the youngest of the bunch, screamed and tried to run, but an arrow took him in the back and he pitched forward into the dirt. The last one, the leader, was faster. He grabbed Lydia, yanking her up by her torn dress to use as a shield. He pressed a cold blade against her neck. "Show yourself!" he roared into the trees, his voice shaking. "Show yourself or the girl dies!" For a second, there was only silence, the crackle of the fire, the pounding of Lydia's heart. Then, the leader's eyes went wide. His hand went slack. The knife fell from his fingers, clattering on the stones. He looked down, confused, at the dark, feathered shaft sticking out of his chest. Behind him, a man emerged from the shadows. He was tall, silent as the grave, with long black hair tied back from a face that looked like it was carved from stone. His chest was bare, painted with symbols she'd never seen before, symbols of war and sorrow. He was a Cheyenne warrior, and he had just ended her nightmare. But a new one was just beginning. He didn't look at her with pity. He didn't look at her with lust. He just looked. His eyes were dark and steady, taking in the scene with a calmness that was more terrifying than the violence that had just happened. Lydia lay trembling on the ground, the firelight dancing on the faces of the dead men around her. She was no longer a bride-to-be. She was no longer Charles's property. She was no longer the bandit's prize. She was just a girl, alone in the dark, at the mercy of the silent killer who had just saved her life. And she had no idea if he was her savior or her new captor. The warrior didn't speak a word. He moved with a chilling efficiency, first checking the trees for any more threats, his body a coiled spring of lethal grace. Then he walked over to the bandit leader's body, calmly pulled his arrow free, and wiped the blade on the dead man's coat. His silence wasn't cruel. It was something else, something older. It was the silence of a man who had learned, the hard way, that words were cheap and actions were everything. He finally turned to Lydia. She was still on the ground, wrists bound, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He knelt beside her. His eyes were as dark and deep as the river flowing nearby. Slowly, carefully, he reached for the ropes on her wrists. She flinched. A raw, primal instinct screamed at her. No more hands, no more men. But he stopped. He didn't pull back, but he held his hands open, palms up, a gesture of peace. It was a question, not a demand. He waited. For what felt like an eternity, he just waited, his patient gaze holding hers. Only when she gave the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod did he resume his task, his knife slicing through her bonds with a single, clean cut. "You are safe now," he said. His voice was the first sound he'd made, low and even, the English words spoken carefully, like objects he was examining before he used them. "They will not come again." Lydia blinked, her mind still spinning. The sudden stillness was deafening after the chaos. Her throat was raw from screaming, her hands were bruised and bleeding, and her thoughts were a tangled mess. Who are you?" she whispered, the words scratching her throat. "My name is Cana," he replied, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I saw their fire. I followed it." He handed her a water skin. She drank like a woman dying of thirst, the cool water a balm on her split lips. She choked once, but didn't stop. When she was done, she looked down at herself. Her wedding dress was in tatters, smeared with dirt and God knows what else. Her pride was a distant memory. They were going to sell me, she muttered, the words tasting like ash. Like I was an animal, like I was nothing. Cana stared into the fire, his expression impossible to read in the flickering light. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his dark eyes met hers. "You are not nothing." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She didn't know whether to scream at him or burst into tears. "You don't know me," she choked out. "I know someone who fights, even when she is tied," he said, his voice flat, stating a fact. "I know someone who survives, even when she is abandoned." He stood then and walked over to the bandits' horses, beginning to strip the saddlebags from them. He wasn't asking her permission, he was simply doing what needed to be done. "Take what you need," he said, his back to her. "Then we leave." The word hung in the air between them. "We," her voice cracked. "We," he didn't turn around. "You cannot stay here. You will not last the night alone." A long, heavy silence stretched out, broken only by the crackling of the flames. Lydia stared at the shadows of the trees, which seemed to dance and writhe like vengeful spirits. She looked down at her own hands, bruised, bloody, but finally hers again. Charles had left her to die. Those men had tried to break her. But this stranger, this silent, deadly warrior, he hadn't asked for a single thing. Not her name, not her gratitude, not her tears. He had only offered her a choice. Slowly, painfully, she got to her feet. Her legs shook, but they held. She walked over to the saddlebags he'd thrown on the ground. Her fingers brushed against cold coins, a block of dried meat, a flint and steel. Survival. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Cana finally turned to look at her. He didn't smile, but something in his gaze softened, just for a second. "Where they will not find you," he said, "where you get to choose what happens next." And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Lydia took a breath that didn't taste of fear. It tasted of smoke and pine and the faintest, most fragile glimmer of hope. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted, but he was right. She couldn't stay here, and she was done letting other people decide her fate. They traveled for days, mostly in silence. At first, it was a strained, uncomfortable quiet. Lydia clung to the saddle of a stolen horse, every jolt sending a fresh wave of pain through her bruised body. Cana rode ahead, a stoic silhouette against the vast, empty canvas of the prairie. He rarely looked back, yet she never felt like he would leave her behind. It was a strange, unspoken assurance. The world here was so wide open it felt like it could swallow you whole. There were no fences, no walls, just an endless expanse of grass and sky. Lydia didn't ask where they were going. In the beginning, she didn't care. Every hoofbeat was a step further away from Charles, further away from that clearing, further away from the man who had held her heart in one hand and a bag of silver in the other. That was enough. But by the third day, the silence started to feel different. It wasn't just the absence of words. It was heavy. It was full of things unsaid. They stopped by a shallow, crystal-clear stream to water the horses. As Cana knelt by the water's edge, Lydia finally broke the quiet. "You don't talk much, do you?" Cana didn't look up. He simply cupped his hands and drank from the stream. After a moment, he answered, his voice calm and low. "Talking is for those who need to prove something." "And you don't?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. He finally looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see right through her. "I already know who I am." The simple certainty of it struck her. She envied it. She stared at her own reflection in the water. The face looking back at her was a stranger's, lips swollen, one eye turning a deep shade of purple, her cheeks streaked with dirt like some kind of twisted war paint. "Do you know what it feels like?" she whispered, the question escaping before she could stop it. "To be sold? By the man who swore to protect you?" He didn't answer right away. He picked up a smooth, flat stone from the creek bed and turned it over and over in his palm. The silence stretched, and Lydia thought he was going to ignore her. Then he spoke one word. "Yes." She looked at him, startled. You were sold?" "Not by a lover," he said, his gaze distant, "but by someone who should have stood and fought beside me, my own brother. He chose gold over our people, over his family. I carry that memory every day." He drew his arm back and flicked his wrist. The stone skipped twice across the water's surface, before disappearing into the depths. 2 perfect rings spreading out, then gone. "So, what did you do?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I walked away from the ruins," he said, standing up. "And I started building something stronger." Lydia hugged her knees to her chest, a sudden chill running through her despite the afternoon sun. "I don't even know who I am anymore. Not without Charles, not without the farm, not without the future I thought I had." Then it is time to find out, he said simply, turning to the horses. Not as someone's bride, not as someone's victim, but as yourself. She stared at his back, the quiet conviction in his voice echoing in the empty places inside her. Could it be that simple? Could she just decide to be someone else? That night, as they made camp under a blanket of stars so bright they looked like holes punched in the fabric of the night, something shifted. Kana laid his blanket down beside hers, not too close, not too far, just near enough that she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that if the darkness came for her again, she wouldn't have to face it alone. And for the first time, she began to wonder about the man next to her. Not just what he had done, but who he was. He said he was building something stronger, but he was out here, alone. What exactly was he building? And why did she get the feeling she was now a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not? By the 5th day, the flat plains began to buckle and rise, giving way to rolling foothills. The grass grew thinner, replaced by stone and hardy trees that clung to the rugged landscape. Kana led her off the main trail, following a path that was nearly invisible into a hidden hollow carved into the base of a tall cliff. A small stream trickled through it, and wildflowers pushed their way through cracks in the rock, their bright colors a small act of defiance against the harsh terrain. "We stay here for a time," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. "It is safe, hard to find." Lydia slid from her horse, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. The long ride had battered her physically, but it was the silence that had worn her down the most. The silence was filled with echoes, Charles's voice, the bandits' laughter, the sickening feeling of being treated like an object. Kana began gathering firewood without a word. He didn't order her to help. He simply started working, and after a moment, she found herself working alongside him. He showed her how to strip bark for tinder, where to find the driest moss, how to stack stones in a circle to build a proper fire pit. His movements were economical, precise. Every gesture was a quiet lesson. And in those lessons, he was offering her something she hadn't realized she'd lost. Respect. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked that evening, kneeling across the small, crackling fire from him. "You owe me nothing. You don't even know me." Kana didn't look up from the piece of wood he was carving. "I know what was done to you," he said, his voice low. "That is enough." She looked at him then, really looked at him, not just at the broad shoulders or the faded scars that crisscrossed his forearms. She looked at the stillness in him. He was a force of nature, like a mountain or a river. He wasn't loud or boastful like the men she'd known her whole life. He didn't puff out his chest or make grand promises. He just was. "Most men would have left me out there," she said softly. "Or worse. Many would have. Claimed me. As payment for saving me." "I claim nothing," he said, his eyes finally meeting hers across the flames. "I offer shelter. The rest is yours to decide." The words hit her harder than any fist. Yours to decide. No one had ever given her that. Not her father, who had arranged her marriage to Charles. Not Charles, who had decided her life was worth a handful of silver. The world had always told her what to be, what to do, who to belong to. This man was telling her she belonged to herself. Later that night, she lay wrapped in a thick wool blanket, staring up at the sliver of star-dusted sky visible through the trees above. Kana sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with a whetstone, the rhythmic shing-shing-shing, a strangely comforting sound. He began to hum a low, quiet tune. It wasn't a song, not really, more like a prayer. "Will they come looking for me?" she asked into the darkness. "Charles, or what's left of the bandits?" He didn't look at her, his focus entirely on the blade in his hands. "Perhaps," he said, "but they will not find you here." He paused, tapping the hilt of his knife. And if they try, they will regret it. A fragile sense of security settled over her. She turned onto her side, watching the flames dance. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust a man again. Then do not, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Trust yourself first. The rest will follow when it is ready. And there, in the quiet glow of the firelight, Lydia finally let the tears come. Not tears of fear or grief. These were different. They were tears of release. It was the slow, painful, cleansing burn of the old her turning to ash. The girl who believed her worth was measured by who wanted her, who chose her, who owned her. She was starting to believe in something else now. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Herself. But as she drifted off to sleep, a new, unsettling thought surfaced. Cana had said he was building something stronger after his brother's betrayal. But out here, in this desolate place, all he seemed to be doing was surviving, running, hiding. Was he building something? Or was he just waiting for a war he knew was coming? The days in the hidden hollow fell into a rhythm. It was a simple, quiet life, dictated by the sun and the seasons. Lydia learned to wake with the dawn, not with a sense of dread, but with a purpose. She learned to gather berries from thorny bushes without tearing her skin, to clean and gut a fish with the same knife that once made her flinch to even look at. The hollow slowly transformed in her mind. It was no longer a hiding place. It was a sanctuary, a place where the name Lydia didn't mean property or victim. It just meant her. Kana was a patient teacher. He taught her how to read the clouds to predict the weather, how to identify animal tracks in the dirt, how to sleep with one ear open for the snap of a twig that was out of place. He never spoke down to her. He simply noticed what she didn't know and offered the knowledge quietly, like passing a cup of water to someone who was thirsty. One morning, she caught him watching her. She was down by the stream, rinsing her hair, the long strands falling loose around her shoulders. When she looked up, his eyes were on her. He didn't look away this time, and neither did she. "Do you still think about him?" he asked, his voice so low the gurgling of the stream almost carried it away. She knew who he meant. "Charles?" she said, her voice catching slightly. He nodded once. "I try not to," she admitted, twisting her wet hair and wringing it out. "But sometimes I remember the way he used to say my name, like it belonged to him, like it was his to carry." Cana's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is not love," he said, his voice flat. "That is ownership." She felt a surge of boldness. "And you?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Has your heart ever belonged to anyone?" A shadow passed over his face, something ancient and deep. He looked away, toward the distant peaks. "Once," he said, the word heavy with a past she couldn't imagine. "A long time ago. She died giving birth to our son. I buried them both beside the river where the wild roses grow." The air grew still. "I'm sorry," Lydia whispered. "Do not be," he said, turning back to her, his eyes clear. "She taught me something no warrior, no chief ever could. She taught me that true love is not about what you can hold in your hands. It is about what you set free." They didn't speak again for a long time after that, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. It was full of shared grief, of unspoken understanding. That night, Lydia sat by the fire, watching Kana sharpen his blade as he did every evening. The ritual was comforting, predictable. "If I never go back," she said, the question forming on her lips before she'd even thought it through, "who do I become?" "You become who you choose to be," he replied, without pausing his work. "Not who you were promised you would be." She leaned her head back against the cool stone of the cliff wall and closed her eyes. The fire crackled between them, warming her skin. But there was another heat, a slow, unfamiliar warmth rising in her chest whenever he spoke, whenever he looked at her. It was the way he never reached for her, yet was always there. It was the respect in his silence. She had been touched too roughly, too carelessly, by too many hands. But this was different. This was something that waited, something that watched, something that hadn't yet been named. And though she would never have dared to say it aloud, her heart was beginning to learn a new language, a language of patience, a language of strength. But a chilling thought crept in as she watched him. He spoke of setting things free, but his hands never strayed far from his weapons. He spoke of peace, but his eyes were always scanning the horizon. He wasn't just hiding from the past. He was preparing for a future he hadn't told her about, a future that was coming for them, whether they were ready or not. Rain came in the middle of the night, a soft, steady drumming that wrapped the hollow in a curtain of gray mist. Lydia awoke to the scent of wet pine and stone. She was tucked under the natural rock overhang, and the blanket she'd fallen asleep with was pulled up to her chin. Cana must have covered her. She looked out. He was already up, tending to the fire, shielding the precious flames from the persistent drizzle with a curved piece of bark. Rainwater trickled down his bare back, his long hair plastered to his skin. "You should stay dry," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. He glanced over his shoulder, his face stoic. "The fire is the heart of the camp," he replied. "Letting it die is like letting the silence win." She didn't fully understand his words, but she felt the truth in them. She thought of the cold, dead silence in her own heart after Charles's betrayal. Yes, that was a silence that could kill you if you let it. Without thinking, she got up and joined him by the fire, helping him feed small, dry twigs to the embers. Their hands brushed as they worked. It was a fleeting, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the cold. Neither of them pulled away. "I used to believe that love was being chosen," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the sound of the rain. "Like you were a prize, something a man earned." Cana nodded, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Many are taught this," he said. "Few unlearn it." "And now," she trailed off, searching for the words. "Now, I think, maybe love isn't something you get. Maybe it's something that lives in the space where no one asks anything of you at all. But you want to give them everything anyway." He didn't answer with words. He just turned and looked at her. And in his gaze, she saw it. Not pity, not desire, not ownership. It was something else entirely. It was recognition. It was as if he was seeing not just the woman she was now, but the woman she was fighting to become. She had never, ever been looked at that way before. Her breath caught in her throat. That night, after a quiet meal, the rain finally softened to a gentle patter. Cana was carving again. When he was finished, he held out his hand. In his palm was a small token, carved from a piece of bone. It was shaped like a flame. "Why a flame?" she asked, taking it from him. The bone was still warm from his touch. "Because a fire does not ask the world to make room for it," he said. "It simply burns." She closed her fingers around the small carving, its sharp edges pressing into her palm. A promise. Not of love, not of forever, but a promise of strength, of resilience. In that small, quiet moment, something passed between them that was more powerful than any kiss, more binding than any vow. It was an understanding. She went to sleep that night to the lullaby of the rain, and for the first time her dreams weren't of running away. They were of standing her ground. She had found someone who didn't rescue her, but who reminded her how to rescue herself. Her heart didn't need to hide anymore. But as she clutched the bone flame, a cold dread washed over her. Fire doesn't just provide warmth. It attracts attention. It casts a light that can be seen from a long, long way off. And she knew, with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty that their quiet little sanctuary was about to be discovered. It was the 8th morning. The morning the past came riding back. Lydia was grinding roots to make a bitter tea when she saw it, a faint plume of dust rising above the ridge in the distance. It wasn't the scattered, aimless dust of a wild animal. It was a straight line, controlled, deliberate, a rider. Her blood ran cold. Kana was gone, down by the creek checking the traps he'd set. Her first instinct was to scream his name, but she choked it back. No, not this time. She stood up slowly, her back straight, her shoulders square. She pulled the skinning knife from the sheath on her hip. The handle was smooth and familiar in her hand. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't hide. She would face whatever was coming. The rider emerged from the trees, a dark shape against the morning sun, and her heart stopped. It was Charles. He looked different, thinner. His clothes were ragged, and a wild, desperate look was in his eyes. But the arrogance was still there, in the way he sat his horse, in the sneer on his lips as his eyes landed on her. "Lydia," he said, swinging down from the saddle. He took a step toward her. "You're alive." "No thanks to you," she said, her voice as cold and hard as the knife in her hand. "I came back for you," he insisted, his voice pleading but his eyes shifty. "I tried to track you down. Those bandits, they turned on me. They took my money and left me for dead." "You sold me," she cut him off, her voice dangerously steady. "I saw you. I saw the silver in your hand." "I was desperate," he hissed, his eyes darting around the small campsite, taking in the single fire, the neatly stacked wood, the furs laid out to dry. "We owed people money, dangerous people. You don't understand the pressure I was under." "No," she said, taking a step forward. "You're the one who doesn't understand." His jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed as they found the second set of footprints, the larger blanket, the signs of another person. "What is this? You living out here with some savage? Is that what this is?" He lunged for her. "You belong to me." His words were cut short by a sound, the unmistakable thrum of a bowstring being pulled taut. Charles froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes wide with fear. Kana stood at the edge of the clearing, an arrow nocked in his bow, the point aimed directly at Charles's heart. He was as still and silent as a statue. "She was never yours," Kana said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a death sentence. Charles's face went pale. He raised his hand slowly. "Easy now, friend. I just came for what's mine." "She is not a thing to be taken," Kana said, his knuckles white on the bowstring. "Not a horse, not a rifle, and not a woman." But before Kana could release the arrow, before Charles could make another move, Lydia did something that surprised them both. She stepped directly between them. She looked Charles dead in the eye, her own gaze unwavering. "I choose where I belong," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "And it is not with a coward who trades a woman's life for a bag of coins." But then Charles did something she didn't expect. He laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a crazed, desperate cackle. "You think this is about you?" He spat, his eyes wild. "You stupid girl. It was never about you. It was about what was in the dress. Where is it?" Lydia stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The deed!" he screamed, his face turning red. "The deed to your father's land. The one your mother sewed into the hem of your wedding dress before she died. The dress I gave you." The world tilted on its axis. The wedding dress. The one she had ripped to shreds in her grief and rage days ago, using the scraps for cleaning rags. Sewn into the hem. Her father's land. The land Charles's family had bought for a pittance after her father's death. It hadn't been a sale. It had been a theft. And the dress held the proof. This was never about love. It was never about debt. It was about a hidden inheritance he meant to steal from her one way or another. He hadn't sold her. He had sold the key to his own undoing, and now he was back to get it. Charles's face twisted into a mask of pure fury when he saw the dawning realization in her eyes. You know, don't you? You found it. Where is it, Lydia? Tell me, or I swear I'll... He never finished the threat. Cana stepped forward, the bow still raised, his voice a low growl. You will leave. Now. Charles spat on the ground. This isn't over, he snarled, backing away towards his horse. That land belongs to Silas Croft now. He paid me for it, and he will get it. When he finds out you have the deed, he'll send more than just me. He'll send an army. He swung himself into the saddle and glared down at them, a final venomous promise in his eyes. You and your pet Indian are dead. You just don't know it yet. Then he was gone, galloping back the way he came, leaving a trail of dust and terrifying new questions in his wake. Silas Croft. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. The silence that fell over the hollow was heavier than any they had shared before. Lydia's hand trembled, the knife feeling useless and small. She had faced the man who betrayed her, the man who owned her past, but he had just thrown her into a future that was infinitely more dangerous. Cana finally lowered his bow, but his eyes remained fixed on the trail where Charles had disappeared. Who is Silas Croft? Lydia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Cana turned to her, his face grim. He is not a man, he said. He is a disease. They call him the Baron. He builds his empire on stolen land and broken lives. He runs a settlement a few days west of here, more like a fortress, where he keeps men who are loyal only to his gold. The bandits who took you. They worked for him. Everything clicked into place, the casual cruelty of the bandits, Charles's desperation. It wasn't just a simple sale. It was a transaction with a devil. The deed. Lydia breathed, her mind racing. It's for the land my homestead was on. It proves my father was the rightful owner, if Croft wants it that badly. It means the land is more valuable than you know, Cana finished for her. And he will not stop until he has it, or until everyone who knows about it is dead. She finally understood. Charles wouldn't be back, not alone. He would go crawling back to this Baron Croft, and Croft would send his killers. They weren't just hiding from a ghost anymore. They were being hunted by a monster. That night, the fire felt different. It wasn't a comfort. It was a beacon, advertising their location to anyone who might be looking. Every crackle of the flames sounded like a footstep in the dark. Lydia and Cana sat on opposite sides of it, the space between them charged with a new, urgent tension. You have a choice to make, Cana said, his voice low and serious. The world of the settlers is that way. He gestured with his chin to the east. You could disappear in one of the towns, change your name, start again. He then gestured to the north, towards the deeper wilderness. Or you could go that way. Live a life of solitude. Few would ever find you. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Or, you can come with me, to the lands of my people, and you can fight. Fight? The idea was insane. She was one woman. He was one man. How could they fight an army? Why? She asked. Why would you fight for my land? For my problems? Because Silas Croft is not just your problem, Cana said, a deep, cold anger entering his voice for the first time. The brother I told you about? The one who chose gold over his own people? Lydia nodded. His name is Coda, and the man he sold our family's secrets to was Silas Croft. Croft's men raided our winter camp years ago. They killed many, women, children. They took things that cannot be replaced. He looked down at his hands. I am not building something stronger, Lydia. I have been preparing for a war. This is my fight, too. The confession hung between them, a bridge of shared pain connecting their two broken pasts. He wasn't just a random savior. She wasn't just a random victim. Their paths had been destined to cross, tangled together by the same dark web spun by the same spider. She thought of the wedding dress, now just rags. She thought of the deed, lost to her own anger and grief. But maybe it wasn't lost. She had torn the dress apart right here, in this hollow. The pieces were scattered, used for cleaning, for tinder. "Wait," she said, her eyes scanning the small campsite. She crawled over to the pile of rags she used to clean their cooking pot. She frantically sorted through them, her heart pounding. And then she saw it. A small folded piece of parchment, stained and creased, that had been tucked into a strip of the dress's hem. She held it up. The deed. She looked at Cana, the firelight dancing in her eyes. The choice was no longer a choice. It was a calling. Running would mean letting Charles and Croft win. Hiding would mean living in fear for the rest of her life. She stood up and walked around the fire. She stood before him, not as a woman who needed saving, but as a woman who had found her purpose. "I am not a victim," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And I am done running." She held out the deed. "You said you were waiting for a war. Well, it's here." Cana looked from the deed in her hand to the fire in her eyes. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips for the first time. "Then let's go give the Baron what he's been asking for." They traveled west, towards the heart of the beast, but this was not a journey of escape, it was a journey of intent. Lydia no longer rode hunched over, a victim of her circumstances. She rode tall, her eyes scanning the horizon, the knife at her hip a comforting weight. She was no longer a passenger in her own story. Cana rode beside her, an equal. The silence between them now was not one of awkwardness or fear, but of shared purpose. A warrior's silence. They were two arrows aimed at the same target. As they drew closer to the lands Cana called home, the terrain grew wilder, more beautiful. They passed through canyons painted with stripes of red and orange, and forests of ancient pine that whispered secrets to the wind. Finally, they stood on a ridge overlooking a hidden valley. Below, nestled between two towering bluffs, was Cana's village. Smoke curled from the tops of a dozen teepees, and the sounds of life, children laughing, dogs barking, the rhythmic beat of a drum, drifted up to them on the evening air. It was a place of peace, a peace she was about to shatter with the war she was bringing. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice tight. Bringing this fight to your home?" "My home was attacked by this evil long before I met you," Cana said, his gaze fixed on the valley. "You are not bringing the war, Lydia. You are bringing the chance to end it." As they rode down into the village, people stopped to stare. There were no pointing fingers, no whispered insults. Just curious, cautious eyes. They saw a warrior of their own, Cana, returning, and with him, a white woman in tattered clothes, with a fire in her eyes they did not yet understand. An elder, a woman with a face like a beautiful, wrinkled map of a long life, met them at the center of the village. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She looked from Cana to Lydia, then back again. "She is not one of us, Cana," the elder said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Her name is Lydia," Cana replied. "Her fight is our fight." He quickly and quietly told them the story. Of Charles, of the bandits, of the stolen deed, and of the man who tied them all together, Silas Croft. When he spoke the Baron's name, a flicker of pain crossed the elder woman's face. "Silas Croft," she repeated, the name like poison on her tongue. "I know this name. Years ago, after the raid. He is the one who took my granddaughter. We never saw her again." The air grew thick with a collective memory of pain. Lydia's personal fight had just become the tribe's. Her quest for justice was now their quest for vengeance. Lydia stepped forward, holding the deed. "I am not a warrior," she said, her voice ringing through the quiet village. "I am not Cheyenne. but I will not let that man take anything from anyone ever again. I am asking for your help, not just to get my land back, but to get your justice." The elder woman looked at the deed, then into Lydia's eyes. She saw not a helpless outsider, but a kindred spirit forged in the same fire of loss. She placed a hand on Lydia's shoulder. "You are fireborn now," the elder said, giving her a new name. "You rose from the ashes of betrayal. You will not fight alone." That night, a council of war was held. Warriors gathered, their faces grim in the firelight. They spoke of Croft's fortress, a place called Baron's Reach. They spoke of its high walls, its dozens of armed guards. A frontal assault would be suicide. As they debated, a scout ran into the circle, breathing hard. "A rider approaches," he announced, alone, carrying a white flag of truce. Warriors grabbed their weapons, suspicion instantly filling the air. Cana stood, his hand on his knife. "Who is it?" He says his name is Coda." The name dropped like a stone in a silent pool. Cana's face went rigid. His brother, the man who had betrayed him, who worked for Croft. Here, now. "It is a trap," one of the warriors spat. "Let me see him," Cana said, his voice dangerously calm. They brought him into the firelight. He looked like an older version of Kana, but where Kana's eyes held a steady calm, Coda's were shifty and nervous. He looked at his brother, then at the ground. "Kana," he began, his voice strained. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I am here to help. Croft has gone too far. He has become a monster. I want to help you take him down." "Why?" Cana asked, his voice like ice. "Did his gold finally lose its shine?" "He has my son," Coda whispered, his voice cracking. "He took my boy to ensure my loyalty. I have to get him back. I will tell you everything. His defenses, his patrol routes, a secret way into the fortress. I will help you destroy him if you help me save my son." The warriors muttered amongst themselves. Could they trust a traitor? Could they believe the man who had brought ruin upon them once before? Lydia watched Cana's face. She saw the war raging within him, the desire for revenge against the brother who broke his heart, warring with the chance to save the village and an innocent child. "It's a lie," a warrior insisted. "He will lead us into an ambush." "Perhaps," Lydia said, stepping forward, her voice capturing everyone's attention. She looked directly at Coda. "But sometimes the only way to catch a snake is to follow another snake into its den." She then turned to Cana. "What if the trap is part of our plan?" Cana looked at her, a new understanding passing between them. He saw her plan instantly, a trap within a trap. He turned to his brother. "Tell us your plan," he said, his expression unreadable. "Tell us everything." The plan was audacious. It was a razor's edge between victory and total annihilation. Coda explained there was a weak point in Croft's fortress, a dry irrigation ditch that ran beneath the western wall. It was narrow, treacherous, but it would allow a small group of warriors to slip inside the walls while the main force created a diversion at the front gate. Coda would lead the small team, including Cana and Lydia, through the tunnel. His price was simple. When they found his son, they would let him escape with the boy. The council argued late into the night. It smelled like a trap. It felt like a trap. But it was the only chance they had. Finally, the elder woman gave her assent. They would trust the traitor, but they would not be fools. As they prepared for the raid, Lydia found Cana staring into the fire, his expression troubled. "You believe him?" she asked softly. "I believe he wants his son back," Cana replied. "I do not believe it is the only thing he wants." He looked at her. "Your plan, it is dangerous." "So is doing nothing," she said. "He thinks we're desperate. He thinks we'll walk right into his ambush in that tunnel, and we will. And when the trap is sprung, it will be on them," she said, a grim determination on her face. "Not on us." The night of the attack was moonless and cold. A large party of Cheyenne warriors, screaming and firing arrows, launched a ferocious diversionary attack on the main gate of Baron's Reach. The fortress exploded with activity, men shouting, guns firing, chaos reigning. Under the cover of the noise, Coda led a small group, Cana, Lydia, and 5 of the tribe's best warriors, to the hidden entrance of the irrigation ditch. The opening was covered with overgrown thorns. "This is it," Coda whispered, his eyes darting nervously in the dark. "Once inside, we follow it to the courtyard. My son is being held in the barracks on the north side." Cana nodded grimly. "Lead the way." They crawled into the narrow, dark tunnel. It was claustrophobic, smelling of damp earth and decay. Lydia's heart pounded against her ribs. Every sound was magnified. This was it, the moment of truth. They moved for what felt like an eternity. Then Coda stopped. "We are under the courtyard," he whispered. "The exit grate is just ahead." But Cana put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. "No," Cana said, his voice a low whisper that chilled Lydia to the bone. "This is where the trap is." Coda froze. "What are you talking about?" "The diversion at the front gate was too successful," Cana said. "Croft would have pulled all his men to fight it. But there are men waiting for us up there. I can hear them. Too many of them. You weren't leading us in, Coda. You were leading us to our graves." In the suffocating darkness, Coda began to tremble. "No, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Cana growled. "You made another deal with him, didn't you? Our lives in exchange for your sons. He was never going to give him to you." A sob escaped Coda's lips. "I had to try." Just then, the sound of heavy scraping came from above. They were opening the grate. Light flooded the tunnel, silhouetting a dozen of Croft's men, rifles aimed down at them. "Looks like your little reunion is over," a sneering voice said from above. It was Charles. He stood over the grate, a rifle in his hand, a triumphant smirk on his face. "I told you I'd be back. The Baron sends his regards." It was over. They were trapped, boxed in. But then Lydia smiled, a cold, hard smile. "That's what we were counting on," she said. From behind them, back down the tunnel, came a sound, the sound of scraping stone. One of the Cheyenne warriors with them pushed aside a loose section of the tunnel wall, revealing another, even smaller passage. A passage Coda knew nothing about. While Coda had been confessing his plan, the elder woman had remembered an old tale, a tale of an even older secret escape tunnel built by the original inhabitants of this land, a tunnel that intersected the one Croft's men had built, a tunnel whose entrance they had found just hours before the raid. Cana grabbed his stunned brother by the collar. "The trap was never for us, Coda. It was for you." He shoved Coda forward, out into the open space beneath the grate. "He's all yours," Cana called up to Charles. Charles and Croft's men stared down, confused. This wasn't part of the plan. And from the main courtyard, the sounds of battle suddenly grew louder, closer. The diversion at the front gate had been just that, a diversion. The real main force of Cheyenne warriors had used the chaos to scale the eastern walls, and were at that very moment pouring into the fortress. The trap had been turned. The hunters were now the hunted. Charles screamed in rage, firing his rifle blindly down into the tunnel, but they were already gone, scrambling into the secret passage. The battle for Baron's Reach was short and brutal. Caught between the warriors already inside and the new force pouring over the walls, Croft's men were overwhelmed. The empire built on fear and blood collapsed in a single night. Lydia and Cana emerged from the secret tunnel into a small storeroom. From there, they fought their way to the barracks. They found Coda's son, a small, terrified boy, huddled in a corner. But there was someone else there, too. A young Cheyenne woman, the elder's granddaughter. She had been a prisoner here for years. The reunion back at the village was one of tears and joy. The elder embraced her long-lost granddaughter. A piece of their people's heart returned. Koda was brought before the council. He was not celebrated as a hero. He was judged as a traitor, but his son stood beside him, and for that reason, his life was spared. He was exiled, banished to live alone in the wilderness, to think upon the choices that had twice led him to betray his own blood. A fate, Cana said, that was worse than death. In the chaos, Silas Croft had vanished, but his power was broken. His fortress was smoldering ruins. And Charles? Lydia found him hiding in the stables trying to steal a horse. He was no longer arrogant. He was just a pathetic, terrified man. He begged her to let him go, promised her anything. She looked at the man who had sold her, the man who had tried to have her killed, the man who had been the catalyst for her entire nightmare. She could have ended his life with the knife at her hip. She could have seen him dragged before the Cheyenne for justice. Instead, she did something else. She just shook her head. "You're not worth it," she said, her voice devoid of hatred. It was worse. It was full of pity. "You have nothing. You are nothing." She turned and walked away, leaving him in the dirt. She left him to the justice of a world that no longer had a place for men like him. Weeks later, the valley was at peace. The stolen land from the deed was returned to its rightful Cheyenne owners. Lydia stood with Cana on the same ridge where they had first looked down upon the village. She no longer wore the tattered rags of her past. She wore simple buckskin, a gift from the elder woman. The fire-born. "What will you do now?" Cana asked. "I think," she said, looking out at the endless expanse of land. "I'm finally home." She turned to him. The unspoken thing that had lived between them in the silence and the firelight was now free to be spoken. "You never tried to save me," she whispered. "No," he said, his voice soft. "I just stood beside you while you saved yourself." "And now?" she asked, taking his hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers. "Now," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his eyes. "We build something stronger. Together." Her past had been a story of betrayal and survival, a story written for her by cruel and greedy men. But she had taken the pen back. She had burned the old pages and started a new chapter. A chapter of love, not born from ownership or debt, but from respect. A chapter written in the language of a warrior, a language she now knew by heart. A love not traded, a love not owed, a love that was, finally, her choice. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, and want to hear more tales where the darkness is met with unyielding fire, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. You never know what story is waiting just beyond the tree line.